What is Severance's hidden meaning that no one is talking about, and how does it affect every single one of us? Imagine you had the option to skip work for an entire day and still get paid. Would you do it? But what if you actually go into work? You just experience a daily dementia of sorts, where you forget everything you did at work, but you actually work, and then you come out and you don't remember any of it. Do you still do it? Well, this is exactly the premise of the latest hit show on Apple TV, Severance. This show takes place around the hyper-technological but slightly dystopian company called Lumon. The company's most important goal is to maximize productivity from its employees. And to do this, they offer a procedure called Severance to make you forget your outside life while you're at work and make you forget your at-work life while you're not at work. Seems like a win-win, right? The company gets productive employees that block out all the personal issues they may be dealing with in their life, and the employees get to block out the laborious, sometimes strenuous nature of their 9-to-5 desk job. Well, as you can imagine, this idea does not play out as perfectly as it would on paper, and so the situation goes left. But what if I told you that the premise of Severance isn't just science fiction, that there's actually a hidden meaning in the show that is based in a current reality we all live? But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. So if you're new here, or if you're not new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, as a huge percentage of the people that watch this channel, unfortunately, are not subscribed. All right, let's jump into the video. Okay, so I'm gonna do my very best to not give away any major spoilers, but we probably will do a part 2 of this video. So the premise is, a gentleman named Mark. He's basically the protagonist. Mark goes into work at Lumon, kind of a sketchy company, has some spiritual undertones. We'll get into those in another video. Mark's best friend, Pete, ends up quitting the job and makes contact with Mark. It's really spooky stuff. I don't want to give it all away, but what ends up happening is Mark has to then hire and train Pete's replacement, and Mark gets a promotion. So now Mark is the lead of his office. So they basically are working an office cubicle job. They don't quite understand what they do, and they're trying to bring in a new employee that Mark is responsible for. So there's a scene where the new employee, her name is Helly, is laying on a desk, and she has just had the severance procedure done, and Mark has to basically welcome her into the job. Helly doesn't know anything about herself. She doesn't even know her name. She doesn't know her parents' name. She doesn't know anything. She's a clean slate. And so that version is what the show calls an innie. It's the person that works the day job. It's the person that doesn't remember anything about their real life because of this procedure they had done that puts a chip in their brain that creates a severed person. They show how the procedure goes, and then they show that every time they go into an elevator to go in the basement of their offices, that's where their offices are located, that the chip gets activated and they forget their outie life and become the innie person. So this may sound okay, but think about it from the innie's perspective. All the innie sees is that they go into an elevator and right back out of an elevator, meaning they don't get to sleep, they don't get to do anything besides work their job. It's non-stop work. Here's the writer behind Severance explaining how he came up with this idea.
Wrote the pilot while I was working a series of temp jobs, on lunch breaks and when I could. And I sort of caught myself having this fantasy, you could say, where I was like, man, I wish that if there was some way that I could just skip over the next 8 hours of my life and just immediately it's 5 p.m. and I can go home. Like, I would 100% do that. And just realize, like, that's a kind of scary thing to catch yourself wanting, less precious time on this earth.
So in a moment, I'm going to tell you guys about a scriptural tie-in that I think actually speaks directly to some of what's being discussed here. And I'm not saying this was the intent of the writers of the show, but this is definitely a takeaway that I had. But I want to give you guys a bit more context. I don't want to spoil it too much, but the rest of the season 1, goes on to explore these innies, their personalities, how they're navigating these things, and their attempt to have some autonomy and more or less break out of their innie life. Now, what's hilarious is that this dystopian show is hosted by Apple TV. And Tim Cook made an ironic commercial where he himself goes into the innie offices and walks through and engages with the character. This led to Apple employees pointing out how ironic this is, considering that Apple seems to be a place like Lumon Industries. And if there's ever a company that's going to have a severance procedure, it'd probably be Apple. But the real life crossover isn't just about Apple. I actually believe this show reflects something that many of us deal with in our real lives. And it's this idea of compartmentalization, meaning just like Severance, we can all have a tendency to compartmentalize different aspects of our lives. Think of it this way. Are you actually the same person in your work life that you are in your family life? Are you the same person when you're with your close friends that you are at church? Or are you sometimes presenting yourself slightly different? Now, I think most of us probably do this to various degrees, but when we see this become more intense, I think it can create a degree of tension and cognitive distortion on our souls. Meaning this, if you're always compartmentalizing parts of your life, and you're always a disintegrated person, that can come with massive internal conflict. So in psychology, compartmentalization is a psychological defense mechanism in which conflicting thoughts, emotions, or experiences are separated and stored in different mental compartments. This allows individuals to avoid the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, where two incompatible beliefs or experiences coexist. This is how you have the person that goes to the club or goes to the bar Saturday, gets drunk, does some stuff they regret, and keeps showing up to Sunday over and over without ever confessing, dealing with, or repenting of the issues they're dealing with on Saturday. This is how you get the person that's living the double life. This is how you may have a person in leadership or a pastor who is having an adulterous affair in one aspect, but they're presenting themselves as being perfect and having it all together. I think all of this at its core is actually us wanting to detach from dealing with the realities and the discomfort of our day-to-day lives. We don't want to feel adversity. We want to be removed from it. And it's interesting because this idea of being double-minded is echoed in scripture. So check out what James chapter 1 says. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds." If you're a follower of Jesus, you aren't just promised comfort and joy and sunflowers and rainbows. You're gonna go through trials. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Hard things produce perseverance. Going through things that are uncomfortable is the way most of us grow. Verse 4, he says, "Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." When we compartmentalize, we are exhibiting a degree of immaturity, in my opinion, where we want to segment certain parts of our lives. Sometimes people will segment even friend groups. They'll keep this group of friends over here because they don't want it to overlap with their church friends. This is not healthy, friends. Now check out verse 5. He says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without fault, and it will be given to you." So I love this because I think so many of us may have a lack of wisdom on how to deal with a tough situation, maybe how to even deal with an uncomfortable job. And instead of going to God and praying about it and trying to seek wisdom, godly wisdom, we just suppress it. We just continue the game of compartmentalization and being a disintegrated person. When we feel tension, when there's certain things that perhaps spike anxiety, instead of going to God, we go back and deeper into our thoughts instead of really processing, why do I feel so much anxiety when I'm presented with this situation? So if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Sometimes we ask God for wisdom, and God may present a different pathway we should be going through in that relationship or in that career. Other times we ask God for wisdom, and he tells us to go through the tension, to go through the discomfort, not to avoid it. Verse 6 says, "But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind." I think, in my opinion, this is alluding to that cognitive dissonance where you're believing things that are incongruent, where you're believing things that aren't true. Yeah, I know God loves me and he's a good father, and it says to ask for wisdom, and it says to present my request to him, but does he really love me? Or does God even exist? Is God even hearing me, right? This is the sort of stuff where your doubts is like a wave of the sea, blowing and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Check this out. Now, this is the punchline. Verse 8, "Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do." The person that's disintegrated, the person that is constantly in this place of believing things that aren't true. They think God is for them, but they don't really know. They believe God, but only to a certain degree, is double-minded and unstable in all their ways. And this is why Severance is not a utopian show. It's a dystopian psychological thriller. Perhaps one of the reasons why it's so popular is because it's a mirror in terms of how many of us view life, work, family. And the solution isn't to become more compartmentalized and double-minded. The solution is to go through the tension and the adversity that we face, through the suffering that we have to deal with in certain aspects of our lives. You know, I think about the word integrity, and I think as followers of Jesus, we are called to be people of integrity. And the root word of integrity is integer, meaning one, meaning we're not supposed to be these different people depending on who we're with. We're supposed to be the same consistent person. Integrity, a person that is one, a person that doesn't switch up depending on who they're with. And some of us have to go through a process of reintegration to understand, why do we feel this tension? Why are we struggling? Why are we dealing with all these things? And if you want to hear more on how to overcome some of those patterns of sin, I actually alluded to it when I was on the George Janko podcast, but I decided to go even deeper and tell you everything I know about this topic that took me 30 plus years to learn, and I share it with you in only 16 minutes. We'll have that over here. All right? Love you guys. Peace.